All right, can you believe it already that next week is spring break, which means we are halfway through the semester, which is amazing because it seems to me like we just started, but time flies, I guess, when you're having fun. So there will be no class next week, in-person class or video lecture or anything. It's a good week for you to catch up if you're behind on anything, or rest up, or hopefully do a little bit of both. What I'm going to do today is I'm going to talk a little bit more about jQueryUI, and I'm going to sort of give a preview of our next topic, which is server-side scripting. So we should have enough time for that. We'll see how it goes. All right, we talked last time and maybe the time before, I don't remember, about jQuery and how jQuery is a set of libraries that are a library of functions that are used with, they're used to enhance, I don't know if enhance is the right word, to simplify, to streamline, however you want to put it, JavaScript. We can do things in jQuery in a much more concise way than we can do it in plain old JavaScript. And one of the things that we talked about was jQueryUI. And jQueryUI is a list of, I think they're described as widgets and interactions that you can do on your page. For example, tabs. We have our tab control, similar to what we did. We did that in plain old JavaScript early on in the semester. But if we look here, with just a little bit of code, we can create our tabs. And we can do, we can customize this a little bit. This is the default functionality. We can make these sortable too, where we can rearrange the tabs if we want to. We can add tabs. Open on mouse over. Get to contact via Ajax, and we'll talk more about Ajax in the second half of the term. Collapse content. Let's look at sortable and vertical tabs. Let's look at sortable and let's download the source of that. Let's view the source. And let's make it a better size. Now let's save it to the desktop and call it tabs.html. And we can open it up. And it is not working. Gee, I wonder why it's not working. Let's take a look at this. All right. One of the things, if you notice, is it's looking for jQuery in the wrong place. And it is looking for the style sheet in the wrong place. I have noticed that with these examples. So just as a warning, if you take one of these examples and try to adopt it, this should be HTTPS : code jQuery. All right. And this, you would have to put a path to your style sheet. Now, I don't have a style sheet, so I'm just going to remove this line of code. So there we have our tabs the way we want. Again, to review that, this should be HTTPS and change the path of the style sheet if you want. Now let's see what happens, and let's go through this. All right. We have a function that is going to make tabs out of the thing that has an ID of tabs. So the thing that has an ID of tabs is this thing here. And so if you're setting up tabs, what are you going to do? You're going to emulate this. You're going to have a UL at the top for your tabs, and then you're going to have divs going down that correspond to each of the tabs. And the href for each of the links in the UL is going to be the ID of the corresponding tab. So the first link opens up this, second link opens up this, and third link opens up that. And the tabs functionality in jQuery and jQueryUI makes the other tabs disappear and so on. Now, we can see the customization, and again, just to sort of preview how this works, we find within the tabs, the tab, we find the thing that has a class of UI tabs navigation and make it sortable. Well, if you look, nothing in our HTML has a class of UI tabs nav. So that might be a little puzzling just to look at. But here's what happens, and here's how jQueryUI works. Remember, jQuery is both some CSS, or jQueryUI rather, is both some CSS and some JavaScript. So when we assign something as having tabs, it actually goes and adds these classes to elements. So let's go and view the source here. We won't see it through view source. Maybe we'll see it through inspector. Yeah. You see it through document element the element inspector. So we look at one of these tabs. Notice that even though this is not in the original HTML, the JavaScript added these classes and roles to the different UI elements. It added something to the tabs. It added something to the links on the top of the page. Now, that's why if you notice here, when we load jQueryUI, it is both a style sheet and it is some JavaScript. Now, this version has to match this version. The JavaScript that we use has to match the version of the CSS that we're using. Otherwise, you might not get perfect results. We also download jQuery too. We have to download jQuery before we download jQueryUI. And there we go. There, I don't think the version is as critical. I think you can use this with pretty much any version of jQuery, although don't quote me on that. Now, here are some arguments to the sortable function. We said we want to make the thing that has a class of utabs nav, which is utabs nav, that UL, all right, that URL that contains all this, has a class of utabs nav, which we can see through our element inspector. And we're applying the sortable function. That sortable function takes some arguments. One is an access of X. If you remember from, what class is it? Some kind of algebra. The X-axis is a horizontal. So this means that we can sort these horizontally, as opposed to vertically. We can't take them vertically. Now, if we made this Y, I'm curious to see what happens. And it tries to allow us to move it vertically, but it doesn't really have the effect that we're looking for. So X means that we're sorting it horizontally. This removes focus so that we can restore it if the tab was focused prior to sorting. Okay, what that means is that if we click on this tab and we drag it, click on this tab and we drag it, have to save. We click on this and drag it, it remembers that this tab was selected, so it will still be selected after release it. That's what these two things do. This looks to see what tab was focused on when you start dragging, and when you stop dragging, it's going to refresh the tabs and it's going to remember that that tab was focused, and it's going to keep the focus on that tab. It's a good idea to look at this when you use it. Don't just simply use code that you find in examples or whatever blindly. Do your best to take a minute to read through them and understand them. And again, if something isn't clear, you can always ask me for clarification on that. Now, as I mentioned, this is a default styling, and it looks pretty good. What if we wanted to style things differently? Well, if we were to style this, we would have to know of all of the classes that are in jQueryUI, UI tabs, UI corner all, UI widget, and so on. There's a tool that you can use that will make this a little easier for you, and that is called the Themeroller. All right. So let's go and let's try to build a jQuery theme that will work. We go back to module and look up. There's a video about this, by the way, because again, remember my goal in this class is just to sort of introduce you to these topics, but more information is provided for you on the web for you to get more details about it. But I'm going to click on the Themeroller. What I can do is I can style things different ways. So if I want to make, well, there's a gallery first of all. So I could pick a look that I wanted, and let's do that. Let's say I want this theme. Somewhere in here, I should be able to download. Oh, right underneath it. I can download it. And what version are we using? We're using 1.13.2, which is what we have here. I guess the version of jQuery does matter. It says that this one requires jQuery 1.8 or higher. All right, so I want the version for 1.13.2. And I can download it. I think I can download it. Is there something that I am forgetting to answer? Click this. Oh, there we go. I have a feeling that the link is just the Word download, and I was clicking on the space around that. So I'm going to download this, and I'm going to get my style sheet. So now I can take that style sheet and incorporate it into my code. So just take this folder and put it with my source code. Oh, it's right on the desktop. And then I can put the path to it in here. And it was in that folder twice. And then I can pick that I want jQuery theme minimum. And again, we talked about minimum before. That is without all the extra spaces. That can be pain. So let's save this and let's see if this works. And it doesn't. What am I doing wrong? Fortunately for us, it gives us an example of what we need to do. And we can look at that example to see what we need to set up in our page. jQueryUI, .css. Oh, I did that. Oh. We're getting an error here. jQuery is not. jQuery is not defined in jQueryUI JS. Oh. Usually wish the error would just be something simple like, hey, you forgot the ending bracket. There we go. So now we have our tabs looking the way that we wanted them to look. We can also make our own theme if we want to. And let's go back to that. And I could say, for example, that for my tabs, for the font, it's a little hard to read, I could make it bold, and I can make the size 2EM. So my tab will be big like that. I could put the family as, let's say, Garamond, serif. Corner radius I could put as, that's 3 pixels, I think. It's really hard to read for me. I'll make it 6 pixels. You notice it got a little more curved, the tabs, and all the other things. Header, toolbar, border. Let's make the border, let's make this bright so it's obvious. We'll make it yellow. And the text we will make bright purple. Content background we'll make black. And the text we'll make white. All right, I think you get the idea of this. We can then go and download this theme. Same thing as before. I can uncheck the parts that I'm not interested in. But I'm going to go ahead and download this. What is going wrong with this button? I'm going to use the keyboard to select it too. Finally, maybe it's just taking a long time to respond, and I'm sitting here clicking it like a fool, hoping that it works. So anyhow, generates that. We can go and we can take our UI CSS and pop it into our folder. Actually, I'm going to just put it on the desktop. And then I will change this guy to say style sheets in the same folder. So and there's the tabs the way that I'd set them up on a theme. So I'd encourage you for the next lab to, I think it's a requirement for the next lab to play with the jQuery Themeroller and come up with something customized as opposed to taking the default. Just remember the couple of catches that I mentioned. And be patient when you click the button because you never know how long it's going to take to finally pop up. All right. What I'd like to do now is give a little bit of a preview for what we're going to talk about next class, the class after spring break. So not next week, but the following week. And that is server-side code. And let me make sure I got the right example here. Yep, perfect. All right, let's go back to my famous diagram that I draw in almost every one of my classes. The basic interaction between a client and a server. Client makes a request that goes through the internet and it gets processed by a web server. And the web server delivers the HTML back to the client. Now, in the case of static pages that are pages that are the same each time, that are just plain HTML. All the server does is retrieve the HTML file and deliver it as is to the client. In the case of server-side scripting, the server uses a server-side script. A script, another word for script, is a program. And the server executes that script and produces HTML. So the server runs the server-side script and uses the results of that to send back to the server or to the client that made the request of the completed web page. So the web page is not ready to be delivered. It has to be processed. That script has to be processed by a web server and delivered to the client. Now, I'm going to, when I enable week 9's material for you, there's going to be information about how you can install your own web server if you don't already have one installed. All right. So we'll save that for the week after I get back. I'm really just talking about conceptually now. Now, the point is that scripts have to be executed to produce an HTML page. Think of the script as a recipe for the page. All right. The client wants some food. All right. The client wants an HTML document. All right. Client can't eat a recipe. They want food. They want that recipe after it's been processed by the server and an HTML document is created for them. Now, what happens after that HTML document gets delivered to them is the stuff that we've been talking about. JavaScript, jQuery, jQueryUI, and all that stuff. So let me show you what I mean and what a basic PHP script looks like. Now, in order to do that, I'm going to take my basic PHP script and I'm going to copy it to a special place on my machine. And that special place, and this is the default for Windows machines running IIS, which is Internet Information Services. That default is CINET pub www root. What is the significance of that? The significance of that is that this is where my web server on this machine looks for its files. So we can't simply double click on a file and run it like we did with HTML pages, right? With our HTML pages, all I had to do is double click on it and I was good to go. Boom, I can open it up. It's no longer true. I have to request the web server to process that script. And how do I request the server? First of all, I put the name of the web server. And in our case, the name is localhost. Localhost means the web server running on this machine, and that is standard. So it doesn't matter if you're running on a Mac or a PC, or if you are, running a different web server or whatever. Localhost is the default name. That means the web server on this machine. All right. I then provide a path to the file, starting with the default document location. Now, the default document location on this machine is CINET pub www root. And the file that I want is called first.php. And what we get is we get a chart of the numbers from 1 to 100 and the value squared. Now, you could probably code this in HTML, right? However, that's a lot of math to do by hand, even with a calculator. And if you do it and you were to create those table rows and table cells, you're liable to get something wrong. So let the script do the work. Let the script do the mathematics. So what is a server-side script in PHP? A server-side script in PHP is a mix of two things: plain old HTML plus PHP code. So here is that example of first.php. And if you notice, everything from here to here is plain old HTML. Doc type, HTML tag, head tag, title, head, body, H1. Then finally, this is plain old HTML. The web server doesn't need to do any processing on plain old HTML. It simply sends as is to the client the HTML code. Now, the second ingredient in a PHP script is the material that is in the PHP tag. And here is how we designate that we are not in HTML, we are in PHP by this declarative. $sign question mark PHP is where we start going into PHP mode. Question mark greater than sign is where we end PHP mode. So everything between here and here is not plain old HTML. You notice that, right? It looks different. So what do we have in here? I have a print statement to print a start table tag. What does a print statement do? It sends that to the client. And in the case of here, it's sending a table tag to the browser. This is sending a table row with two THs in it. Finally, it's sending the end table tag. Well, what about the loop? The loop is something similar to you've seen in C# or JavaScript, a basic for loop that starts n at the value of 1. It continues as long as n is less than or equal to 100, and it increments n by each time. So n equals 1 the first time through the loop, 2 the second time through the loop, 3, 4, 5, 6, all the way until n is 100. When n is 100, it's going to try and do the loop one more time, and it's going to add 1 to 100, and it's going to get 101. Now, 101 is no longer less than or equal to 100, so we're going to drop out of the loop. What are we doing with that number? We are squaring it. We're multiplying it by itself and given the answer. Let the computer do the math for you. Don't try to manually, do all those calculations. And then we are outputting, and this is where we're really taking advantage of PHP, we're outputting the value of those variables as part of a table row that contains two TDs. So this is the code that gets run on the server. Everything that's not in this PHP tag is assumed to be plain HTML and just gets sent to the client as is. This stuff is PHP code. It gets processed by the server, and everything that is in a print statement gets sent to the client. So this for loop doesn't send anything to the client, but this print does. And this print is going to execute 100 times, so there's going to be 100 table rows. This is the code that's run on the server. If we do a view source, this is the code that gets sent to the client. This is the HTML code that gets sent to the client. And if you look close, there's all those table rows with the TDs being a number and a number squared. Now notice this HTML isn't formatted in a way that we usually format HTML because it's the server-side code that's creating it. And therefore, there's less of a need for us to pay attention to the way how it's formatted because we just want to make sure the code that we write is formatted correctly. So in this, remember that the server-side script is going to produce, it's going to output HTML. And it's going to output HTML via a mix of plain old HTML along with PHP code that produces HTML. This is getting a little ahead of ourselves. We don't have any assignments to this till after break, but I did want to sort of plant this idea because it's an important idea. And it's different than we've done before. So if you're doing server-side coding, you're making web pages, but you're making web pages in a different way than we did in CISS232. You're not writing the HTML. You are writing the code that writes the HTML. And that code has everything in it that any programming language has. So we can do calculations. We can interact with a database. We can manipulate the data. We can do conditional processing so that if one thing is true, we do this. If another thing is true, we do that, and so on. So this allows our pages to be dynamic. That is, it depends on maybe the user input or other things. This code is really easy to maintain. We could simply make this go to 1,000 simply by changing that to 1,000. Hitting refresh. Goes all the way up to 1,000. We view the source from this. It generated 1,000 rows in that table. All right. So that's your introduction to server-side scripting. Next time when we get back in 2 weeks, I will be going over how to get a server on your machine and then more details about basic PHP so that we can go on from there. Are there any questions? Okay, have a good break. I hope you catch up with anything that you're behind on over break, and I hope you have some time to take it easy and rest. So we will see you in a couple of weeks.